There was a time when I read about 100 books in over 2 years. Your past defines your future only if you let it. Hello, friends. Welcome back to Dreadful Encounters. My name is Joy. I'm an adult living, working, breathing in New York City. Among other things, I like to talk about my feelings on the internet. I'm making a book video because I haven't done this in a while. Last year, I made a 5 books you should read in 2023. Do not watch that video because I just rewatched it and I cringed so much. That was so bad. There was a time when I read about 100 books in over 2 years. I just like reading and wanted to fill my time with something other than social media, and therefore, because I have a tendency to like overdo things, I ended up reading like so many books. I read 40 books in 2020, 53 books in 2021, and 35 books in 2022. There were so many nonfiction books that I read. The 5 that I'm going to talk about are some of the nonfiction books that I actually generally really enjoyed and would recommend. I chose these books because in the state of life that I'm in right now, I feel like they're very helpful and useful to me, and therefore I wanted to share a little bit about why I like them, but about what I learned from them. I want to preface this video by saying that there's a lot of hype around nonfiction books, right? I actually think that for nonfiction or self-help books, you should only pick up the book you really need, and you should not really buy into the trend. If you have trouble like setting a habit, you should read a book that helps you set a habit, and you shouldn't just be throwing yourself at every self-help book out there, because that is the gateway to like hating reading and also feeling bad about yourself. I have like a pretty complicated relationship with like self-help books because it kind of like makes you feel like there's always something you have to improve on. The truth is, like, we are people, you know, we're not like a work in progress. If there's something we want to work on, we should work on it, but we shouldn't constantly feel like we're a work in progress. So take what you need, and whenever you do pick up a self-help book, don't feel bad for like skipping around, and yeah, just enjoy it. So the first book I'm going to talk about is 4,000 Hours, which is a nonfiction book that actually made me feel something, which is really rare because typically nonfiction books like make me think but not feel something. It really made me feel something about my existence. 4,000 Weeks is about time management, but it doesn't just talk about time management. It focuses on how as humans we struggle to choose, and it doesn't like tell you how to make time for everything, but instead it acknowledges the fact that we're human beings with limited time, and therefore we should be choosing how we spend our time wisely. One of the main takeaways I got from that book is that we will never have enough time. But even though we will never have enough time, we do spend a lot of it doing things that we don't like. So one of the concepts discussed here is to reverse that effect. You know how a lot of finance gurus tell you to, when you first get a paycheck, to pay yourself first by automatically deducting a certain amount to your saving account. You can apply the same principle to time management by like spending a designated amount of time every day doing something you want to for yourself, so you don't end up feeling like your time is constantly slipping away from you. The other thing I like was it talks about how we tend to like quote unquote waste our time, which is questioning whether or not we're at the right job and whether we're dating the right person. The book tells us that we will never have the perfect answer, that nothing is like 100% right, and there's no way to like maximize every given step. The third and last point, it talks about how productivity can also be a trap. Most of the time when we focus on being productive, we realize that there's actually a lot more that we need to do, and that productivity trap feeling is not great, and therefore we should just focus on things we want to do and realizing full and well that we are unable to do everything. Meaningful productivity requires patience and letting things take their time, but we tend to conflate patience with passiveness and not doing enough. To live a life we want, we need to say no to a lot of things. To reiterate, this book is incredibly great from a self-help perspective, but also it really made me question like how I want to spend my time and my life as like a human being, given the fact that the number of hours are actually limited, even though it might not feel that way when you're young, but we actually don't have as much time as we think, and therefore we should be wise in spending it. The second book is How to Not Die Alone, which is essentially a book that was recommended to me by someone on TikTok. And it talks about dating. It does a really good job at portraying how the nature of like dating in this like day and age, things like online dating makes us feel like we have infinite choices when we actually don't. The book also references the love language book as well as the attachment theory book, which are both books I also read and I think are great in their like respective regard. I personally love to read about like relationships too, because I believe that relationship takes a lot of like hard work. The key takeaways I got from reading this book was when you're choosing someone, you need someone to pass a certain standard, which she describes as someone who is kind, emotionally stable, loyal, and has a growth mindset, and you can have difficult conversations with and bring the best in you. And everything else you you can like sort of like work on after that point. As long as you meet that golden standard, you can like work things out, because she also says that relationships in reality is a lot of grunt work and endurance. She also encourages us to be like aware of our like personal relationship blind spots. She also says there are 3 buckets when it comes to dating styles, aka the maximizer, romanticizer, and the hesitator. Third book is by Brene Brown, The Gifts of Imperfection. Brene Brown has just like such a soothing like aura to her, and I love all her books so much, but I really enjoyed Gifts of Imperfection. It felt like a therapy session. And it's no surprise that I like it, given the fact that I love like thinking about my feelings, reflecting on my feelings, and just being in touch with them. One of the things that really struck to me is how to develop self-compassion for yourself. And if you're kind to other people but not kind towards yourself, what you're actually doing is like creating a smoke screen. And there's a lot of like toxic behaviors that you are hiding. And what does it mean to be kind towards yourself, right? One of the ways to do it is like to speak more kindly towards yourself, but also setting boundaries with other people. Like setting boundaries is something that was really hard for me, because I grew up in like an Asian household that like kind of like expects everything from you, and it might not be considered as like a feminine slash gentle behavior, but it actually like saves you from a lot of pain in the long run. I also like the chapter about vulnerability and perfectionism. Like living in America, I personally feel like it's really hard to connect a lot of the times. Like people are really nice and friendly, but it's hard to like build that deep connection. And one of the ways to build that deep connection is actually it's by being vulnerable, because like if you're vulnerable, you're basically like opening yourself up, and it requires you to ask for help from someone. And our society sort of like equates like being strong with like not asking for help and just like being fully independent. However, you need to ask for help and be vulnerable in order to like be able to like grow in closeness. Being able to put yourself in a position where you are vulnerable, it requires courage and strength. There's a chapter on perfectionism that I also really like. Perfectionism is not the same as self-improvement, because at its core, perfectionism is trying to earn approval and acceptance. I am what I accomplish and how well I accomplish it. Healthy striving is something different. It is how I improve. This book is just like a gold mine of like really good like nuggets, and I probably will reread this from time to time, because I'm sure that even though I read it and loved it, I will forget some of the messaging and probably will need it in the future. The fourth book is Psychology of Money, which is sort of like a money finance book. I will preface this by saying that I am not a finance bro. Like, I really hated the 4-hour work week. I really hated Rich Dad Poor Dad, and I just don't really like vibe with finance-y things and finance-y books in general. But this book is different because it doesn't talk literally about the money making aspect. It does also tie in emotional intelligence, which I think is really important if you want to like have sustainable success. One of my favorite things in this book, it talks about like the distinction between like success and failure. There's this quote: "Success is when things are going extreme." Success is a lousy teacher. It seduces smart people into thinking they can't lose. When things are going extremely well, realize it's not as good as you think. You are not invincible, and if you acknowledge that luck brought you success, then you have to believe in luck's cousin, risk, which can turn your story around just as quickly. So this is like a really like high EQ way to think about like success and failure, but it doesn't just stop there. It talks about how the bane of like a lot of people's like financial lives isn't really like the money, the business aspect, but rather their like high ego and arrogance and lack of like EQ that actually hurts their businesses. And part of like being able to grip onto that sustainable success is by knowing like what is enough. There's also another quote that I really like from this book that I shall slap here. The crux of this book is how the psychology of money, or how like life itself is not really a game against other people. It's not a game of like accruing the most wealth, but rather life is truly just a game against yourself. Becoming wealthy and staying wealthy are two really dichotomous skills, and the latter requires far more emotional intelligence. Yep, so that's Psychology of Money. Last but not the least, The Courage to Be Disliked. It was like one of those trending books like I think 4 or 5 years ago, and initially I was like really reluctant when I picked it up because I feel like I have like pretty thick skin. But this book is like not about like literally getting disliked. It's a lot of like deeper life things. It talks about like trauma as human beings. The first chapter is very controversial because I think they want to hook you. They want to make you mad so that you keep reading, and it worked because at first when I read it, I was like, this book is kind of crazy. The writer is like not very empathetic, but the more I thought about it and the more I went through life, like now 2 years later after reading this book, I actually think that this book is like really great. The whole discourse in the first chapter can be summarized as your past does not define your future. Your past defines your future only if you let it. Your past holds as much importance as you allow it. So if something really traumatic happens to you, you either have the choice to like dwell in it forever. And the book argues that when you choose to dwell in it, you actually like that feeling of dwelling subconsciously, and it can be tied back to like childhood trauma. If you have the narrative that, oh, I am this way because of something that happened to me, this book says that you're prone to have a more victim mentality. The other thing that really struck me with this book is like it introduces the concept of task, about how people who really fear being disliked by other people, who really care about their image and reputation, actually do so because they haven't like contributed enough to society, which I was like, wow, that is incredibly unique because I never thought about it that way. As human beings, we look for a sense of belonging in society. We're able to fulfill this need in many ways, including helping others. If we live in a self-centered way of living, we will remain to have this desire. We'll look for different ways to fulfill it, like the approval of others. We can free ourselves from societal expectations by leading a more selfless way of living. Isn't that like incredibly profound? When you live for yourself like selfishly and you end up like caring so much about like what other people think about you, it is like such an unfree and like stressful way to live, and it's like not a way to live. This book really think about like my worldview and what like kind of like childhood trauma slash distresses have affected me that I'm not really aware of. 5 would recommend. Read it, feel angry, feel disturbed, but that means then you know that you're reading a good book. Okay, those are the 5 books. You should read them. I encourage you to read them, but you definitely don't have to. You can just like Google summary it, like audiobook it, like do whatever you want as long as you're able to get the lessons or the wisdom you need from these books. And remember that reading and like learning about it is like just the first step. You need to actually implement it to actually feel like the full effect of like learning something new. And yeah, don't always read self-help books, read fiction books, read things that like make you happy and actually truly make you feel excited. Read a nonfiction book if you need it. Don't feel the need to always have to read a nonfiction book. That's it from me. I hope that I don't look back in a year and feel like this video is like absolutely cringe, because this is how I feel about last year's video, but I'm still doing it anyways because not being cringe is incredibly overrated. Thanks for watching, and yeah, if you got this far, please like this video. Thank you. Bye, and see you next time.